to your two-wheeler supplier or your four-wheeler supplier. It's like magic. Take another case. Demonetization happened. It was mandatory to move money into the bank accounts of rural people for the microfinance piece. Within 2 months, this was completely enabled. These are examples from peripheral markets, but they have a big lesson for the capital market. Third example, in the retail sector, it was essential that people got reminded of the fact that they needed to use their code if they wanted to operate their debit card. A retailer who decided to do that was not only able to complete transactions swiftly, but was also able to open up within a few days a facility where from the cash collected during the day, cash could be given out to people without using an ATM. So all of these are frictionless ways of doing business, and that to me seems to be the holy grail that we need to chase. And that these examples are so many.
Sure. Thank you. Mr. Raman, if I can come to you. You've spent a lot of time in government-related organizations and, of course, with SEBI. And you spent time even as an ED of SEBI. Some of us here, at least in this industry that is broking, a lot of us are feeling, while at one hand digital is coming, action is moving fast, etc., we are still bogged down by, the KRA uploads and central KYC and the FATCA and PMLA and whatnot. So in your mind, do you see some changes coming in this area where, it could help in ease in onboarding a customer and, the life cycle of a customer? And in your mind, over the last 4 or 5 years, again, from the regulator's perspective, what were some of the steps that the regulator has taken to help us in easing business across this capital markets?
Well, first of all, thank you to Anmi for sort of pulling me out of hibernation. It's been a few years since I left SEBI, but none the same, it's been a very interesting few years. And I'll sort of get to your question just after a couple of remarks on ease of doing business. And this is in the context of the ratings that have happened to all the state governments. And what we found was that suddenly, I've just returned from being the Principal Accountant General at Jharkhand in Ranchi, and they were suddenly adjudged as number 3 in the ease of doing business. This was last year. They've slipped to 6 this year. But the simple point is, I think we need to understand what this term is. It's a term which many of you might be aware that you've put down a set of questions. There are actually 298 questions which form the backbone of ease of doing business. They split into 8 major areas, and that's how the World Bank has decided to assess different countries. But the beauty of that document is, and unfortunately, what I'm trying to get your mind to look at is, this is a bit of a checkbox. It's like an auditor going and, I'm sorry, auditors shouldn't be doing that, but it's a checkbox. So you go and find out from, a fairly high level that what is it that has been put in place. The fact remains that in that very document it's also said that, and I've gone through the document because we actually looked at it from the Jharkhand perspective, and what is it that happened in Jharkhand to suddenly make it number 3. And we found that some fairly large, literature is there in that document saying it is all about the man on the ground giving his feedback and saying that, yes, there has been a change in ease of doing business. That part is completely forgotten. So, we really shouldn't get carried away with these sort of surveys. I'm not debunking what the World Bank has done, But we need to understand from our own practical experience that if something is working somewhere, it's working. And even if that particular, aspect has not, got into one of the factors of ease of doing business, but there is something very good working there. And I'll come straight into the capital markets, and I'll say that my view of the Indian capital markets is probably it's one of the best in the world. I really don't, look at pushing ourselves so much in this area because we've already leaps and bounds ahead of several countries who are the so-called, developed countries. So this niche came in, and there are several people in this room who've helped create the capital markets to what it is today. But we are ranked at number 13 in the world in ease of doing business for the capital markets, which if you look at it, there are 35 odd OECD countries, and we are not an OECD country, but we are 13. So, the capital markets is one area which I think we've really done a lot from, a much reviled move of saying PAN must become compulsory, but that PAN today has become an absolutely, superb way of identifying somebody who has come into trade. KRA was a great step. In fact, I can share with you today that the dream was to try and get the brokerage side of a group entity. So take any of the large groups, they have a bank, brokerage, mutual fund, everything. The simple point was borrow the KYC from the bank. But we still have not been able to do that. It is very sad that we've had successive budget announcements saying interusability of KYC, but what we ended up doing was central KYC. And it's even, more odd, and I think Mr. Haribhakti put some very, very sound points down, and I would, love to sort of have a much longer session on this point alone. The eKYC has completely changed the world. I mean, if we are to use eKYC, there is no reason why we should have something called a central KYC. It doesn't make any sense. So the motivations for a central KYC may have been completely different. I think we all know what they were at that time with the SIT sort of breathing down government's neck. But the fact remains that the way we have moved digitally in this country, I really would like to know of another country which has sort of, surpassed us in the ability to create digital solutions. The India stack, which I am now discussing, so I'm now in a role where we are creating an information utility under the Bankruptcy Act. I'm sort of, again, out of government, but within a government entity. We're completely sort of backed by the banks, LIC, etc. So we're owned entirely by the financial sector. And our job is to help the financial sector reduce NPAs and get into things like, asset aggregation. So a lot of solutions for the banking sector. Now, the India stack has already got into amazing concepts like consent artifacts. Now, consent artifacts are simple, programs created by you and me, directing another agency to execute digitally a variety of our transactions. So, there is a lot that is happening today where I will say that execution, I mean, the earlier panel was talking about execution. I think execution is going to become entirely free. Execution is something which we will not even bother about. There's no money to be made in that. The money is to be made in pooling different instruments under one hat and being able to, give that as an offering to the people depending on what they need. So, the piece about KYC, KRA, I think a lot of that is going to just get junked when you simply have to use an eKYC. It costs you nothing today to get to get a biometric machine, and tomorrow there's going to be an Aadhaar-enabled phone. So you're 100% correct. I mean, I think we are in unison when we say that it's the phone that's going to create the marvel, because it's already, has the ability. Even if you were to look at feature phones, which is, what half the country has, there's a lot of products that are being created by people like NPCI for the feature phone. So, if we do not, and really I'm addressing, the community in front of me and saying that if we do not get onto the technology that's available and look at a variety of different roles, I think, you'll just be left behind. So P2P has gone places. So the information utility is simply going to hold financial contracts between lender and borrower. And we're still at sort of drawing board stage, but people I've met have said it's probably the P2P segment which may end up using the information utility to the maximum, because you have a neutral third party standing there which is holding, it's like, in a very, sort of bad analogy, but it's like a clearing corporation standing between buyer and seller. And so you have a trust party standing there which will be able to provide information to either side if there's a resolution of any kind. So, the ability for us to innovate, use technology is tremendous. I really don't know where CKYC is going to go ahead, but I think SEBI on its own has said KRA may continue. So my reading between the lines from whatever I saw in SEBI is that they probably might, find CKYC dies its own death, and KRA, which is something which is, proved successful, might just continue. So, coming to the fact, I think the regulatory bodies, and I can talk about, SEBI and the work that we did at that time. There is continuously thought of, improving things. So whether it's on the primary market side, where we've come down to, from T plus, 15 to T plus 6. And if you ask me, it's T plus 0 is around the corner. I mean, it's just a matter of doing it. I mean, we have the exchanges sitting right here, and they know they've got the technology which can do it. So, T plus 0 is something which can happen right there and then. There is a lot which has happened in the mutual fund space, and I think that's, again, a very, very big victory for India, because the kind of monies that have come into mutual funds have been huge. And I think being able to reach to Tier 2 and Tier 3 cities through incentivization is another great step. So I just hope I haven't...
Yeah, sure. No, I think you have covered it very well. Mr. Swami, with so many people that you have been advising about their taxation and their structures to enter India, do you think that, again, over the last 4-5 years, it's been easy for you to advise some of your clients to set up shop here, or give them very clear advice from a tax point of view?
Yeah, I think what on the taxation side, I think India has not had a very good name as far as how the Indian revenue deals with investors, especially foreign investors. But if you look at what's happened in the last, 4 years, if you look back, I think there is a very different approach which the Indian government has started to adopt. Right? Earlier, the approach was followed by SEBI, by RBI. It was a consultative approach. Right? That was something which was not being done by the Indian revenue. But I think if I see back for the last 2 years, I see that approach slowly being adopted. So be it GAR, be it indirect transfer rules, they would want to consult the industry at large and then come out with detailed set of guidelines or rules, and then publish it. Right? I think that's something which is a big shift which has happened or is happening, and that's probably what investors like. Investors also like that there has to be certainty in the tax policies which the government brings out. And even if you look at, again, the last 18 months, probably the Central Board of Direct Taxes have gone overboard in terms of issuing the number of clarifications. Huge number of clarifications have been issued, right? Some may be to your liking, some may not be to your liking, but at least there is some certainty that this is how the tax rules will work, right? So, for example, what happens if you there was this issue of business income versus capital gain, right, for investors. So they have given their view of this is how they're going to treat that, right? And even in the context of, say, India-Mauritius treaty, right? India-Mauritius treaty has been there. I mean, they have been telling that it will be renegotiated. I mean, last 10 years or 15 years, if you look back, every year the newspaper would talk about India-Mauritius treaty being renegotiated, and there was a lot of uncertainty around that. But what has happened the last 6 months, 8 months? India has gone ahead and renegotiated many of these treaties, right? So be it Cyprus, be it Mauritius, Singapore, all of that has been renegotiated. And now at least there is good amount of certainty to the taxpayer or the investor, saying that if they are investing from this particular jurisdiction, this is how the tax is going to be, right? They have also not bought it in a very ad hoc manner. They have bought it in a very, very structured manner. So all your existing investments, if you have, they have been grandfathered, right? So they are not really upsetting any current investments. They are letting people to digest what the changes are. They are building, they are bringing a proper transition mechanism so that people know that this is the tax, say, 2 years down the line. And there was a point, I mean, all the panelists touched upon digitization, right? Indian revenue has adopted digitization extensively, right? Today, I mean, when it started, there were some transitionary problems. People used to say mine data is not correctly reflected and all of that. But as you look back, the journey which the Indian revenue has traveled, it's phenomenal, right? So today you are able to aggregate all the transactions which you have done, and by one login ID you are able to see all that, right? So if you are earning interest in your savings bank account, it gets reflected on your system. So gone are the days where you probably had an arbitrage of the tax office not knowing and you not disclosing that. I mean, that arbitrage is no longer there, right? But that's good in a way, right? At least for the honest taxpayer, you feel that you're not being shortchanged. So I think there's a lot of things which are happening, even on the litigation front. They are trying to give a lot of certainty to the investors. They are merging the authority for advance ruling. They have increased the number of the pool which is available to churn out these rulings. I mean, they have done a lot, and I think that's going to give a lot of comfort to the foreign investors.
Anything in the recent budget which has either been favorable or negative from this aspect?
So if you think in a particular way, I mean, long-term capital gain, probably that did not change. So I would think that's in favor, right? There was a lot of discussion around what will happen to long-term capital gain. Is the 5% tax going to? I mean, is there going to 5% tax going to be imposed or not? And fortunately, I think that's not happening. So I think government understands that for that matter, any investor, you need to have a stable regime, and they are, I think, committed to have that. So I don't think as far as this budget is concerned, clearly long-term capital gain retention is in favor. They have brought in certain anti-abuse provisions, right, in the tax law to make sure that anyone rigging the market, they don't really get the benefit of the long-term capital gain. But those are things which I think are good to have.
Sure. So, Mr. Chauhan, there's often a feeling that in India disputes get dragged and takes 15 years, 20 years to resolve, by which probably it's irrelevant and circumstances have changed and nobody's interested any longer. So what is your view in the capital markets and dispute resolution? Are you seeing changes? Have you seen changes? Do you think the framework is good enough to facilitate dispute resolution?